So if we go outside right now and we find someone who's from Exeter who isn't at breaking convention, and we ask them, what do you think when you think of psychedelics? They will probably tell you something like this. So when people think of psychedelics, most people associate it with the summer of love, the hippie movement, and a big part of that was the concept of free love, which is actually something that started beforehand and was a big movement sort of in response to marital traditions of the time. It's quite interesting. But this, even though the summer of love happened then, and then we had the end of love, sadly, this association has remained. So people often associate sex and psychedelics. However, we are now in the psychedelic renaissance, and you've seen all the talks probably many times. You've seen that psychedelics have been shown that, as promising for treating depression, anxiety, end of life distress, changing people's perceptions, changing, all these different things that we've all heard about. But no one's really talking about how sex might be involved in this. So how do psychedelics, if they have the power to change all of these things and change our perception and our experience of life and change everything, why would they not have an impact on one of the biggest sort of parts of the human experience, which is sex? So this is something I was really interested in when I was setting up and managing the Psychedelic trial, because I did a sort of a search on PubMed for sex and psychedelics, and I couldn't find anything that wasn't about sexual dysfunction. So all of the research has been about sexual dysfunction, but nothing about sort of the effect on sex in sort of a positive direction. So this hasn't really translated to the research part. So thinking about sort of the science behind this, this probably won't come as a surprise to you, but sexual satisfaction, whatever that means to you, even if it's not having sex, that's still satisfaction, is linked with happiness, meaning in life, relationship satisfaction, and medical things like stronger immune system, lower blood pressure, etc. That probably doesn't come as a surprise, but it is a big part of human experience for most people, and it's quite positive for most people. On the flip side, depression, which is what I was working on at Imperial, we have sexual dysfunction is quite common when people have depression, and especially decreased libido is the most reported thing. However, the main treatments that we have, the best tools that we have in medicine at the moment licensed for depression, or the ones that are most used, have sexual dysfunction as a side effect as well. So not only do we have this as a big part of sort of something that makes people suffer, but the medications we have are also making it worse. And it is actually one of the main reasons why people stop taking SSRIs, because they want to feel connected to their partners again. It has a big impact on people's lives. So then I thought, well, wouldn't it be great, since we were comparing, so the clinical trial that I was setting up and managing at Imperial, you probably heard about it before, but it was a randomized control trial. We were comparing escitalopram, which is an SSRI, and psilocybin for depression. We had two different groups. Some people were receiving SSRIs for 6 weeks, and some people had like 2 high doses of psychedelics. And I was interested in this idea that, wouldn't it be great if not only psilocybin doesn't have this as a side effect, so doesn't cause sexual dysfunction, wouldn't it be even better if psilocybin actually made sexual functioning better? So created this sort of what I sort of thought as sexual flourishing. This was the term I had in my head of maybe this is what it could be called, or maybe this is what it kind of how I understood it. This idea of not just talking about dysfunction, but going beyond and saying maybe people will have a better experience of this after having psychedelics. Just to be clear, all of this research and everything we'll be talking about is about the effects of psychedelics on your sexual experience in the future. So not sex on psychedelics. That's a completely different topic that we won't be addressing in this talk, but it's also something that should be addressed in some talk at some point. But our talk is about sort of how psychedelics probably have an impact on people's future sexual experiences. So we all know psychedelics have an effect on our expression, acceptance of feelings and behaviors, and that also includes sexual experience from this sort of very few research that is available, and promote things like mindfulness, empathy, openness, etc., and that can impact sex. So this sort of our idea was, let's explore whether sexual flourishing is a thing with psychedelics in these trials. So the way that we were able to do this, so I was obviously setting up and managing the depression trial, so I put in items to do with sex and sexual flourishing and changing your perceptions into the depression trial, so that's a randomized control trial. But then I also asked my colleagues to put these questionnaires into the survey data as well. So we sent it to hundreds more people. This is naturalistic settings, people taking it at home, ceremonies. Tomasso will talk about it later. And we asked about these questions. It wasn't the main topic of any of these, so that's why we don't have a lot of items, and that's really important to remember. There's lots of limitations which we will discuss, but it was just sort of meant to be a preliminary thing. Let's just start up this discussion, start talking about it, and maybe hopefully get some more researchers to like add this in, and we can have more data. So this is what we included. First, I found a validated questionnaire, the brief index of sexual functioning for women. It was the best one I could find, but there's 22 items in it, and it was a depression trial with many, hundreds of questionnaires. So I was like, I'm just going to pick a few items. So it's not like a validated use of it, but it is a validated questionnaire. And all of these items that I picked can be applied to both men and women. So the first one was pleasure. So during the past month, have you felt any pleasure from any forms of sexual experience? This is well done before and after. Communication. So during the past month, how frequently have you been able to communicate your sexual desires or preferences to your partner? Overall, how satisfied have you been with your sexual relationship with your partner? And overall, how important a part of your life is your sexual activity? And if people didn't have a partner, they were sort of removed from that particular item, if that makes sense. This is just how this questionnaire was made. And then we had one item on body image. So how satisfied are you with the overall appearance of your body? Because I do think that that's a big part of how you relate to yourself and also to your partner and sort of in sexual experience. And we were also at the time creating the anorexia trial that we're running at Imperial at the moment. And it was a big sort of, we wanted to see whether we could find something that came up in other people as well. And then finally, at the time, I think Robin was also creating the rebirth, and there was also, we were all thinking about this idea that psychedelics can change your sort of opinions and viewpoints and values. So things to do with like spirituality and philosophy and how you see the world, how you see yourself, like also things relating to the community. So this idea of free love that was I mentioned before in the community, or spirituality in the community, are all big parts of psychedelics. And so we wanted to see whether taking psychedelics would change this in relation to your sex life. So Hannes Kettner, who is in California at the moment, sadly could not be here, but he did all the stats for this, and he helped me create this questionnaire. So together we created this thing where we asked people, I'm very open to trying new things in my sex life, so quite broad, and I see sex as a spiritual or sacred experience. And people could say how much they agreed or disagreed with this before taking psychedelics and after taking psychedelics. So that is what we asked in these two these multiple studies. Now Tomasso will talk about data.
Thank you. And just trying to catch up what Bruna just explained you. I'm going to present the data from two studies. One is a big naturalistic one of people that collected data before and after a psychedelic experience. That could be either a naturalistic setting, at home, at a festival, or in guided psychedelic experiences such as like ayahuasca or mushroom ceremonies and so on. And people here took the questionnaires 1 week before the experience, and then they had the experience, and we asked the same questions again 4 weeks and 6 months after the experience. And the people here mostly use like LSD or mushrooms as a substance. There's also DMT, 5-MeO DMT, and ayahuasca as possibilities, but all these people took macro doses. So this is not about microdosing. And the total number of people that completed all the time points was 261 participants. And so what did we find? We found in the realm of pleasure that people reported significant increases in pleasure that they derived from sexual activity at 4 weeks, and it was significant at 6 months after the experience. And then also talking about communication with the partner, so the ability to being able to communicate what you like while you're having sex increased at 4 weeks after the experience and remained significant after 6 months. Then when we talk about sexual dissatisfaction, we found a drop in sexual dissatisfaction that even here remained significant after 6 months. And then we did not find anything in the importance attributed to sex. And this quite speaks to the fact that psychedelics might make your sex life better because you are more empathic and in tune with your partner, but you don't get hyper-focused on sex or like hyper-aroused. And I think this is quite important. And then looking at body dissatisfaction, we also found that people reported to be more satisfied with the body up to 6 months after the experience. And I think this has also quite an importance on sex specifically, because if you are very dissatisfied about your body and you over-focus on it, like how I look, will my partner think, do I look attractive, and all of that, can just like put all your resources on thinking about these things and not able to really enter into the experience. And then looking at the beliefs about sex before and after the experience, we found that people reported to be more open to try new things in their sex life. And they also reported to see sex as a more as a spiritual experience after it. And we do not think that these changes are either positive or negative. Some people will regard them as positive, some others will regard them maybe as negative, and we are not really sure what they're linked to. Could also be that people maybe entered more in contact with the psychedelic community after the experience that is more, I would say, oriented to liberal sexual attitudes. And so this also helped them going in this direction. We don't really know, but this was more a curious finding that we got. And then moving into the depression trial that Bruna managed. Basically, we compared people with major depressive disorder that were treated either with 2 macrodoses of psilocybin plus therapeutic support, or a 6-week course of escitalopram and the same amount of therapeutic support. And basically, escitalopram, as Bruna said, is one of the most effective SSRIs on the market. And contrary to psilocybin, that probably helps relieving depression by actively helping people to change and to accept the negative emotions and to let them go, SSRIs usually diminish emotional responsivity. So basically what they do, they make your emotions more tolerable. So you live with less negative emotions in your everyday life, but it usually happens also with positive emotions. Indeed, people report to be emotionally blunted and to kind of have the edge off in both directions in their emotionality, and this can contribute to the sexual dysfunction that this drug causes in around 40% of the cases. And this speaks to the fact of SSRIs and psilocybin having different rates of sexual dysfunction. Indeed, we just had one case in the psilocybin group that reported severe sexual dysfunction after the treatment compared to 30%. And then also here were mild and moderate. But the focus of this was beyond not causing sexual dysfunction. Is there any improvements? Like this 87% of people reported to have no sexual dysfunction, but how was their sex life? Because if you are depressed, usually you are already a bit dysfunctional before the treatment. And I would say we found some preliminary evidence that psychedelics used in therapy can improve sexual functioning even in depressed people. Indeed, we found that there were improvements in pleasure for people treated with psilocybin, but not with escitalopram. We also found that people treated with psilocybin reported increases in communication with their partner, and this did not happen with people treated with escitalopram. But here, as you can see, the baseline were different, so we can like get much of what happened at the end, but we found that this line was significant and this one wasn't. And oh yeah, here we don't have like significant stars, sorry, but I'm just guiding you to the results so you can get them. And looking at here at sexual satisfaction, even here we found significant increases for psilocybin, but not for escitalopram. Importance of sex was not significant at the end, but was close to increase and be more important with patients treated with escitalopram. And this might speak to the sexual dysfunction fact that people started thinking more about it because maybe they felt that something was off in this situation. But again, we don't know. And appearance satisfaction increases in both groups. And this is probably linked to the depression being better and then maybe also being a bit more satisfied with the body compared to the beginning. We did not find any change in openness to try new things in depressed people, probably linked to the fact that they did not enter in contact with the psychedelic community as fully as people using psychedelics in a naturalistic setting, and also because they were depressed at baseline, and so they have different views or attitudes towards sex. And but they reported an increase in seeing sex as spiritual from baseline to the end. This is another graph that basically looks at the level of change in a few components of sexual activity before after the treatment. So we basically ask people, did you think that this domain in your sex life increased or decreased before and after the treatment? And people in the psilocybin group reported that to be more interested, more aroused, to have more activity and satisfied compared to baseline, and a bit less anxious. And in the citalopram group, as you can see, the effects tends to go in the opposite direction. And then I think the next logical question is, why is this the case? So why psychedelics can improve your sex life? Because I mean, I wouldn't say it's counterintuitive, but still, like, you think, okay, like, they have an effect that is not while you are on the drug, and why is this the case? And in trying to explain this, I'm presenting this research that was done around 12 years ago. That was about people that were reported to being able to still have optimal sex in their life and in long-term relationships. And they were interviewed, and it was asked them why they saw that their sex was optimal. And the themes that were found in these interviews were a capacity of being authentic, a capacity of being present in the moment, to be connected to the partner, to share a deep erotic intimacy, also to be extraordinary at communicating between them, and vulnerable too, and also having some risk-taking that was interpersonal, and also to experience this sort of transcendental feeling while they're having sex. And if you look at these components and you take out optimal sexual experience and you put a psychedelic experience, you will kind of see that there are a lot of elements that they kind of come together. And this was subsequently confirmed by parallel lines of research done in the realm of sexual satisfaction and psychedelics. Indeed, it was found that improving mindfulness skills with people that had sexual dysfunction improved it, both in men and women. And psychedelics have been shown to increase mindfulness up to 3 months after the experience, to decrease ruminative thinking and suppression of negative emotions. And then also experiencing emotional connection and intimacy with one's partner helps in maintaining sexual desire in long-term relationship. And on the parallel side, we know that psychedelics can increase connectedness to both yourself and to significant others. Then if we go in the realm of attachment, we found that people found that sexual satisfaction is lower in people that have either an avoidant or an anxious attachment. That is either the incapacity of being away from your partner or to be very scared of intimacy. And we found that psilocybin therapy have some preliminary signs that can diminish attachment and insecurity after 3 months from the experience. So if you put this realm of research together, I think it starts to come into mind why psychedelics can actually be beneficial in one's sex and intimate life. And I'm just briefly talking about this. It is from neuroimaging research to leave some final sciencey side to this. Indeed, there is some strong research done in hyperactive sexual desire disorder in females. That there's this disorder in which people are completely incapacitated to have any form of sexual desire or sexual interest, and they are disturbed by it. Because there are people that are just asexual and they are happy with it, and there's nothing wrong with it. But hyperactive sexual desire disorder is when people would like to have sex, but they can't at all. And there are also not hormonal reasons of why this is the case. And usually this hyperactive sexual desire disorder was explained as a lack of sex neurotransmitters or sex hormones and similar explanations. But what was later on found is that in the brain, this hyperactive sexual desire disorder was linked to higher level of activity in self-referential regions of the brain. So basically, it looked like that these people that were unable to have a satisfying sexual experience had an excessive cognitive activity that was oriented toward themselves rather than to sensory aspects of the experience. So basically, they were perceiving the erotic stimuli that could be their partner or something else, but then the stimuli was not processed by their brain as an erotic stimuli because they were too cognitively interfered by either ruminative thinking, maybe thinking about their day in a self-referential manner, or maybe about their body, and they were not able to completely enter into the experience and kind of being a bit more a spectator rather than an actor in their sexual in the sexual experience. And interestingly enough, these brain regions that have been linked to this disorder are also the ones that are disrupted by the action of psychedelics, and are also similar to ones that are hyperactive in depression and so on. So like the picture of this is quite complex, and there is no study done on psychedelics. It's more like a hypothetical connection that I'm trying to make here, but I think it could make sense. So I'm finishing this to saying that this work has many limitations and is really made as throwing the first stone in the lake and see if other people touch it up. And the items were single, and the analysis were really exploratory. And also we did not have an experimental control and naturalistic data, and so we don't know if without psychedelics people would have improved anyway. Then we did not check what the partner thought, because in the couple realm is quite important, because imagine if people after psychedelics would say, oh, I'm much more satisfied with my partner, and partners I know he's a dickhead. And so I think this is something that should be taken into account when you analyze the thing, and we are planning to do it in a follow-up study that we are now planning. Then people in the study were predominantly white, employed, and educated, and straight, and this also limits the generalizability of the findings. And so further research on the topic is definitely warranted. And I'm leaving the conclusion to Bruna.
So on that note, I think I really wanted the main take-home to be this. Like, psychedelics are a taboo in the wider world. I'm in medical school at the moment, and I've spent 6-7 years in psychedelic research, and it's incredible to me how no one talks about psychedelics in medical school. And it is still quite a taboo out there, but we've sort of all managed to break that taboo for ourselves, I think. However, sex still remains a big taboo, and I kind of like we haven't merged the two taboos together, like in research and also what we talk about, and even in the talks and things. So I think that we need to sort of break both of them and try and understand how psychedelics can be affecting something that is a massive part of most people's human experience, and not just talk about dysfunction, because that's quite medical, but actually go beyond that and see what impact is it having on people's lives, on a sort of greater than that. And the only way that you can do this is by in research is by asking people directly. So when I was working in Psychedelics, I was collecting people's adverse events, and sort of by clinical trial standards, the way you do it is you ask people, how have you been? And they bring you the adverse events. So you don't ask specific questions. But I found that I did then ask people specifically about whether they had had any changes in their libido. And once I did ask them specifically, people did say, so many people then reported them, which then couldn't go down as adverse events because you asked directly. But I think an important thing to remember is that people, because it's taboo, people don't talk about it unprompted, in both directions. And so if you don't ask people directly what impact the psychedelics are having on your research, on their sex lives, you probably won't know that information. And my main take home, sort of anyone who's doing any research or any kind of studies or anything in general really, is to ask specifically about it and talk about it and remember that it's there and it's an important thing for most people. And just carry on our research, put specific questions in, so we can find out more about this and what impact it's having and whether we can use it in a positive direction. We have loads more stuff in our paper that's going to come out. Mm-hmm. So yeah, thank you so much.